USM Television Color 4, the National Life and Accident Insurance Company in Nashville, Tennessee.
Congress when Arizona joined the Union.
Same time he became a state.
Right.
91 years old. Roy Elson was his administrative assistant. Senator Goldwater seeking a comeback and now leading Roy Elson with 3% of the vote in. We mentioned a few moments ago that Senator Fulbright in Arkansas had been projected the winner there. As you remember, Senator Fulbright was a very early and vigorous opponent of the war in Vietnam. And we're going to pay special attention tonight to see how other people who are opponents of the war in Vietnam are doing. In the case of South Dakota, for example, Senator George McGovern, who was a nominee for the presidential nomination in Chicago, of course didn't get it. He is now leading his opponent Archie Gubrud out there, a former governor. McGovern got into some trouble, not because of Vietnam, but because of the identification with Chicago as a convention, which a lot of people at home apparently didn't like. In Wisconsin, another early opponent of the war, the incumbent Gaylord Nelson, is in a contest with the state legislator Jarris Leonard. We'll be paying attention to that to see if the Vietnam issue has had any effect on the election. In the state of Iowa, for example, Governor Hughes, they're changing right now, is running now behind his opponent, state legislator David Stanley. In all the Senate races I covered this year, this was the only state where Vietnam was a clear-cut issue. Senator Hughes calling for a bombing halt, nominating Eugene McCarthy. It was the only state where it was a clear-cut issue, and that was what the debate was all about. Now in the state of Connecticut, where we have projected Abraham A. Ribicoff as the winner, Senator Ribicoff was also an opponent of the war in Vietnam, and he won. And we'd like to go now to Hartford, where Senator Ribicoff was interviewed by NBC News correspondent Aline Saarinen.
Senator Ribicoff, you've just won this election by 55%, about 90 to 100,000 votes. The assumption was that what you said in Chicago about the Gestapo tactics of the police would hurt you. What's your reaction to that and your victory?
Well, frankly, I don't know whether it hurt or helped, Arlene. I did make that speech on the basis that it was going to help or hurt me. I saw a situation that disturbed me. I spoke from my heart and from my conscience, and whatever the consequences were to be, they were to be. So basically, I have no way of being able to tote up the pluses and minuses.
How do you explain the fact that you ran quite a bit ahead of Vice President Humphrey in Connecticut?
Well, I would guess that I had a different type of constituencies, more people from the Republican side and youth supported me probably than the Vice President, but I'm delighted that the Vice President carried Connecticut. I felt some 3 weeks ago that he was going to do this, and I am so pleased that Connecticut reacted positively to the Humphrey campaign.
What is your reaction to the position of the South Vietnamese in Paris?
Well, the South Vietnamese should not be in a position to determine our policy. We have to make our decisions and make it whether they like it or not. We have 540,000 men involved in South Vietnam, and we've got $30 billion a year. I would hope the South Vietnamese would come along. If they don't, we should proceed without them.
One last question. Would you like to predict how this evening is going to end?
I haven't the slightest idea, except that I hope and I believe that Vice President Humphrey and Ed Muskie will be the next president and vice president of the United States.
Thank you, Senator Ribicoff. Senator Abe Ribicoff at his headquarters in Hartford, Connecticut. Aline Saarinen, NBC News.
We're back once again in NBC News election headquarters. Let's see, Arkansas. NBC now projects that Arkansas will be carried by George Wallace with 44% of the vote. Rack up 6 more electoral votes for George Wallace. Maryland, 32% of the vote is now in. Nixon, again, has a rather commanding lead in Maryland with 46%. Humphrey in second place with 35%, and Wallace with a strong 19%. North Carolina, 35% of the vote is now counted in North Carolina. Nixon leads with 37%, followed by Wallace with 33%, and in third place, Humphrey with 30%. Florida, 64% of the vote is now counted. We have projected that Nixon is the winner in Florida with 40% of the vote, however. Only a plurality, not a majority. In Minnesota, we have projected that Hubert Humphrey has carried Minnesota with 56% of the vote. And in neighboring Wisconsin, 1% of the vote is now in, and it's a close one thus far. Hubert Humphrey slightly in the lead by about 100 votes. He and candidate Nixon each showing 46%. We'll be back in just a moment.